Hello, everyone, and welcome to Littlefield live streaming. Tonight's show is Drink and Draw, learning to draw letters like a pro. Now, please welcome your host, Chad.
How's it going? I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you for coming to this webinar of sorts. This is a drink and drink and draw. I hope everyone has their drinks ready. We're gonna do a little bit of a info session and give you guys time to have a couple of sips and settle in, and then we'll kind of go through a little bit of history and then a little bit of typeface basics, and then we'll start to lay out some letters, which is what we're all here for. My name's Chad Jey. Been in mural painting and lettering for I would say close to 20 years, in a bunch of different facets. Started out painting graffiti in San Francisco when I was a kid. San Francisco and Oakland is where I grew up. And that kind of transitioned as I got a little bit older, and especially when I moved to New York, I was able to work with some really amazing companies here. But I've always had kind of a love for typography and letters and art in general. And New York presents a very unique set of possibilities for people that are interested in those fields. So from overall murals to just working as a freelancer and using the connections that I created for myself here, I've been able to do a lot of lettering projects and different, kind of, a handful of different freelance endeavors that, you wouldn't really find a lot of places. But enough about me. Cheers, everybody out there. Sorry, my screen is mirrored, so I'm trying to follow with so that all the letters come out correctly. We'll get going in a second. I kind of just want to jump on a little bit of history first. So before we get into the nerdy stuff, let's have a drink. The basic history of sign painting kind of dates back to, the 1700s, which seems crazy, but 1762, the Grand Exhibition of Sign Painting in London is one of the first times that sign painters really had an audience. There's a lot of history around that event, and I urge everybody to look it up and check it out. It's one of the first times that sign painters or sign artists showed that kind of work. It was a bit frowned upon, and it was thought to be kind of comedical that they would put lettering or typeface up in a gallery and open it up for admission. But there was a pretty wide audience for it, and I kind of found it hilarious when I was doing a little deeper research that most of the sign painters that had taken that work and put it in the gallery would use all of the ticket sale money to go out every night after the shows and drink. And they would ensure that they had money every night to go out to the pubs afterwards by ripping the first page out of the handbook when you came in as a part of your admission, so that you would have to pay again if you wanted to come back. It's just one of those kind of cool niche facts that you find when you're digging into this kind of stuff. But all the way through to the 50s and 60s, I think a lot of people forget that everything in terms of signs on the street, advertisements, anything that you saw was hand painted or hand cut in terms of stamps, lettering presses. All of that was done. Through the 70s, you would find a lot of things that were machined, and they would produce a lot of products closer to 20th century time that and farther down the line that were making things easier to produce in mass. But Still, almost every marketing agency had an art department, and instead of working with Photoshop and Illustrator like we do now, they were physically hand drawing all of these fonts. Any letter form that you saw in an ad, anything that was done was made by hand, and it's pretty incredible. And it, as things progressed and technology developed over the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and digital printing was kind of coming to form, becoming cheaper than paying painters, and overtaking the business, you saw a lot of these small sign shops really struggling, and a lot of advertising agencies, because they were a larger corporation, they needed to look at the bottom dollar, were kind of shifting away from people using, physically made objects. But one of the things that's really captivating and has always drawn people in when it comes to physically made things is not only the awe that comes from seeing something that a person has created, which is to say that like you're looking at something that someone's physically made as opposed to a machine. So you see the laborious efforts that those people put in. You're also looking at hours and hours and hours of back work, whether you realize it or not. And on top of everything, which I think is the most important thing to kind of take away from this, class, whatever you want to call it, is that the human eye is keen on and really gravitates towards error, and there is something very specifically dull and somewhat boring, you would say, about something that's digitally printed because it's so perfect. I'm not taking anything away from digital artists either. I work in digital formats constantly, but there is something that is just quite a bit more interesting about something that's created by hand, and it comes from those flaws. It's not the perfection, it's the imperfection. So what I remind people of a lot of times when they're trying to take on this kind of pursuit, or they think that it's a very daunting task, is like everything else, it's extremely complicated until you do a little bit of legwork and you realize that there are simpler ways of looking at it and more formatted ways of looking at it that make it easier for you to learn. But also that part of the beauty of doing something by hand is that it's not perfect. Large scale murals and topography in general, not necessarily sign painting or lettering, because it's generally done in a smaller format. If you're working really large, like the Sky High or the overall murals guys, things are broken down almost pointillist. So pointillism is basically a series of colored dots that make up a square inside of an entire image. And when you stand back from the image, you're able to kind of grasp the dots coming together. If you want a reference for this, so that you can understand it a little better, there's an artist named Chuck Close that does a fantastic job of, he's built a life's work making pointillist art. But that's essentially what you're doing. You're gathering a bunch of dots, or you're sequentially breaking down a bunch of larger items into small squares, and then you are able to put that up and paint something up close that you wouldn't necessarily be able to keep track of from afar. That's a bit of a stretch from where we're going to be working today. I just want to show you guys kind of the basics of lettering and break down, like I said, the cheat codes when it comes to laying out letter forms and understanding how these different styles of work develop over time and have developed over time, and the ways that people, especially sign painters and people that work in typography, break them down mentally so that they're better understood and they're easier to grasp. And you have to start with the basics. So behind me here, in my humble kitchen, you have a set of letters here, and these are sans-serif. So sans-serif, basically, for you to grasp in your mind, means the way that I kind of connotate it, and the memory that I attach to it is no hats, no shoes, right? It's very basic. It's beautiful, but it definitely has a broken down form. If you're talking about typeface in terms of building blocks, sans-serif is the first block. And it's fantastic in and of itself. I mean, every typeface conveys a point, right? So, and a mood. You kind of have to look at typefaces like they are a personality, and they are expressing what the mood and the context is trying to deliver. So sans-serif is very basic. So if you have any basic information that you need to display in a label, or you want something to be very clean and crisp and cut, sans-serif is your go-to. It's it is the standard building blocks of most typography. You get into serifs. So there are hats and shoes. So at the bottom and the top of each letter, there are these little flourishes. So you have the building blocks from sans-serif, and then you're just adding, and we're going to go through this in entirety once. Sorry if I'm out of frame. I just want you guys to see all of this clearly. And if you can't, please message, and I'll make sure that we buzz in a little bit closer. But effectively, the lettering that you have here is mirrored here. It's just there's a little bit added to it so that it has a bit more character. It's a little bit more elegant. It's a little bit more developed. And then you go up to different strokes and styles that completely either fall into those categories and are augmented, but not by a lot. I just follow me here. They're not augmented by a ton, but they are augmented. And you get into calligraphic fonts, brush fonts, all caps, Roman fonts, lowercase fonts. You can get into fat bottom brush script fonts. But all of these are still building blocks. So you can get something great from something minimal. And that's kind of the whole point of this whole class, is just to kind of give you guys the foundational elements and show you that when you look at a typeface, or you look at a finished document, and it's gorgeous, right? You see these different fonts that are laid out, and everything speaks a certain language, and it's there for a certain purpose. Whether it's a slab, like a very fat, thick font, and it's loud, and it's meant to draw your attention and your eye directly to that point, because it's it is in painting, it would be the center of the painting, or in lettering, it would be the focal point of the, whatever that magazine cover is, or whatever message they're trying to relay on that, concert poster. And, going from this to something that's a very thick and detailed 3D, slab font is really not a huge stretch. And we're going to go over that. So a couple of details to go over. I just want to give you guys a little bit of vocabulary. So as I'm talking, what you can follow along, and what I'm talking about. So there's a pretty common spacing and leveling ability that you'll have with just your ruler and your Sharpie, right at home with an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. You don't need to complicate it too much. We're going to go into the more complicated stuff later. For now, let's just lay out what is basically like a cap line and a baseline, and then an X line. Your cap line is the top of whatever your caps letters are. your X line is the center point where you want the top of your X's or the top of your lowercase letters to go. And then your baseline is the bottom of that same set of letters. So, and it's important to remember that like all of these are constructive rules and they're foundational rules and concepts of lettering, but they're rules that were meant to be broken in so many ways, because when you have something like, you know, a Y or an F or an O, and you want it to line up visually, not constructively, not critically, but visually with everything else, you're going to need to stretch those rules, and we'll talk about why. And then the last thing is kerning. Kerning is the space between letters, and it really does make the difference between something that is visually appealing and something that's not visually appealing. And I'll show you how to kind of conquer the differences between those two fields and space things so that they are constructive and that they come across in the way that you want them to. Like I said, this is a basics class, so I'm not going to really be able to get too deep into detail, but you know, we'll cover the basics and we'll go from there. So you guys have your rulers. I'm going to be using a level and a larger Sharpie because I'm going to be working big. But for the purpose of the class here, why don't we stand up? Let's have another drink too, everybody. I'm still working out the mirroring with the video. Let's have another drink. All right, because this is supposed to be fun. Painting is fun. Sign painting in general is a cult trade. Something a lot of people don't know that I will offer you. Sign painters work on contracts, and those contracts have a timeline and a lifeline. So when you're a sign painter and your business gets contract, you essentially prep that contract as quickly as possible, which means you set up your grids, you set up all of your artwork, and once it's approved by the company, you go to whatever the designated wall is, and you and your team work literally around the clock. And I'm talking sun up to sundown, unless it's sleeting rain or sleeting snow or pouring rain. You are out there painting literally every moment until that mural's done, because the second it's done, the clock starts on their viewership time, and essentially, you know, you're able to get a longer life out of that mural. You know, they're able to get a longer life out of that mural, and it works best for everyone. But just keep that in mind. So when you're looking at those things, you see those guys that their nickname is wall dogs, by the way. That's what sign painters call other sign painters. The kind of industry term is wall dog. Yeah, it's a day in, day out process until those giant murals are finished, and it's grueling work, but it's extremely rewarding, and it's super fun because you kind of just get to focus on making this giant, painting, this giant piece of artwork, and you're working with other people that are generally really awesome guys. So let's start out. So the basics that we're going to go with. You want to find your piece of paper, and with your ruler, try as best as you can. I have a level, so I'm cheating a little bit, but with your ruler, try and find an equal distance between the bottom of your page and the ruler so that you have a straight line, because straight lines, your guides are kind of everything. So as you go through this, you kind of want to pay attention to those small details as much as possible. So that looks straight to me right now, but the bubble's telling me that it's way, way off. So we're straight right there. That's an even, that is a completely horizontal line. So that's our baseline. So that's our baseline. And then we're going to do our cap line. So your cap line is the top of wherever the letters are going to go. All right. So you want this to be as level as you can get it. It doesn't need to be perfect. Like I said, one of the things to remember is that, these are the kind of constructs of how this is done, but you want to obviously get it as good as you can, but perfection is definitely not the goal. This is one of those things that you can put in your 10,000 hours and you can continue to do it for a lot of years after that. And you'll never get to a point where it's perfect because you're doing it and you're a human being and it's going to be flawed. You just have to come to terms with that and enjoy it. And that's the whole point. So your X line. This is a good time to talk about the X line. So with different fonts, you can have different X lines. For a very standard font, like if we're laying out something like this, which is our sans-serif font, that's very basic, you kind of want your X line to be shot right in the middle because you want everything to have a really keen sense of balance. And part of that is uniformity. So, sorry, let me label this for you guys. So this is our cap line. And uniformity with a basic font is really important. So we'll start there. So I'm going to do, and you should do this too at home. Let's try and find center here. So between where your cap line is and your baseline is, and I didn't measure out my baseline and cap line to make it a perfect equal distance, and you didn't either. So we're going to have to probably do a little bit of math here, but that's okay. See if my public education serves me correctly. So I'm 8.5. 8.5 right now from cap line to baseline, which means I'm 4.25 to the center. So I'm just going to mark 4.25, and that is basically where my center line is going to go. And you can line up on your paper the same way that I'm doing and find your X line. Now that looks like you have a good 2 equal chunks here. And the reason that I shot a little bit lower is because anytime you place the level and you're moving with a pen across the level, and this may not necessarily equate at home, but it definitely does for me when I'm working in any like real setting, you're gonna have about a 1/4 inch that this is gonna gap you. The physical pen itself is gonna gap you. And like I said, perfection is not the goal. The goal is to make it close enough to where it looks, effective. You really want to get it to a point where you can visually and acutely dial in your, spatial differences and line up your letters. So now that you have your cap line, let's label this. This is our X line, and it's called an X line. So your baseline is where the letters will land unless they have a flourish, right? Unless it's a Y or a P, a lowercase p. Your X line is where the top of your X's are going to go. It's where your lowercase letters are going to default unless they have a flourish. And it's the center point for the center point for all of your caps letters. So if we're laying out and in constructive form, I urge you guys to just kind of play around with this stuff afterwards. But in constructive form, I would, for the purpose of this class, you want to lay out a horizontal on one side, straight up and down. Okay. So this is your first down bar, right? This is the constraint that you're going to work inside of on the left. And you feel, like I said, when you're working with different typefaces, feel free to break these rules. But you want to measure out again, and this is something that I will stress, definitely. Use your tools when you're working on anything, including our course right now, use your tools to help you. If you are working on something at home and you want an exact spacing for each of your letters and you don't want to, rummage through to find a ruler, you can always just use the pen that's in your hand and just do that. So, you have your pen here, you set it up on your board, whatever you're working on, and you just lean it, make a dot, and then you have your second fault line where you want these things to go. Then drop a line in there. All right. Now use your tools again, right? So kerning, the distance between letters. You just did the entire distance of the pen for the letter itself. Now use your same tool and just do the cap portion. So where the cap snaps on to where the tip of the brush would fall on the pen, just give yourself a dot. And now you have your kerning area, and lay another line. Just want to make sure I'm level here. And you can use your ruler at home, right? You can use your ruler. Think of it like 3 or 4 rulers and then 1 ruler. And this helps you to space things out so that you're not constantly battling with, you get to the 4th letter or the 5th letter and you run out of room on the page, because that'll happen to you. And it's super frustrating. One thing to do is just to, you can do some quick math. If you're trying to break down a letter segment or an entire, two different size pieces of lettering. You'll have your large lettering and then you have your sub lettering underneath it. You can basically configure how many letters you have and then the size of the page, and then figure out where the center point is in the page and the center point is in the middle letter, and then measure out from there. There's these little cheats that you can use that will make it very simple for you to kind of overcome a lot of the challenges that people might think go into lettering and typography in general. And when you're working digitally and things are supposed to be perfect, yes, absolutely. You have the computer, you can play around with the kerning, you can play around with the spacing, you can play around with the boldness, the italics, everything else. When you're hand lettering, especially if you're laying things out on a surface, part of being successful in working quickly is measuring twice and cutting once. So before you even get to your lettering, and that even accounts for at home, you don't want to waste your own time. And it's much more rewarding when you can sit down and do something without having to constantly erase and go back and follow your steps over. Measure twice and cut once. So do all of your homework before you set these things up, and put out these grid blocks because they're super easy to follow and they're not going to lie to you. You know exactly where this letter is going to live inside of here. Okay. So you have your initial grid block. Let's say we're going to do an A. So this block in and of itself is 6.5 inches wide. So we're going to do 3 1/4 is where we're going to mark. And that's our center point. So that's the center of the center. This makes it super simple. There we go. All right. This makes it super simple to break up your letter. So let's have a drink break. So when you're laying things out, now especially with something like, an A or a T, this is a very simple process to go through to find out where your ease points are. In R, where you have these bends, is a little trickier, but we'll go through that. So for an A and a sans-serif A, let's just drop you know, and you can use your ruler if you want to. I'm not going to necessarily because I feel like I can dial this in myself. But now that you have this quadrant laid out, you have these four corners, and you can, trust me, as you get into larger letters or you get into more complicated letters, like an S or an R or a B, which we'll go over, you're going to want these quadrants. You're going to probably want more of them. You might need to cut this in half again, twice, so that you know where, you know, the tops and bottoms of your physical letters are going to drop in. But for the purpose of this specific instance, let's do an A, and we'll do a sans-serif A, right? No hats, no feet. So you just want to drop a line in from the top point of where your center point is down to the corner. Try and make it a good straight solid line, the best that you can, right? Then do the same thing on this side and try and keep equal distance. Same situation, right? Now, barring these two lines, you now have a basically perfectly uniformed A. That's fantastic. And bravo, feel good about it. This is, you can even look at the quadrants, look at all of the other shapes. And that's really the building blocks of lettering in general. So to go through and you know, enhance this letter form, you can add basically whatever you want at this point, and hopefully it's visible enough to where you are able to see all this and follow along. But, you know, breeze down a half an inch, or in your case, like, you know, a 16th, and then find that center point again and cut another line down equal distance to that baseline. Now do it again on the other side. Okay. Now we have our support structure. We have our kind of A-frame, if you will, no pun intended. And then you want to drop in the same line across the bottom here, because you want to leave some, and look at that. I probably should have used the level. So you want to leave enough spacing so that there's a good window. You always want to go for the bottom portion because the legs on this A are nice and tall now. They're equal distance, yes, from the top to the bottom. But you want to leave a nice window here, you know, so that visually, whether this is a really small letter or a really big letter, dependent, everything is clear, and it's clear cut, and it's uniform, right? So this is the reason I call this the building blocks. And let me just color this in really quick so that you guys have a better visual here. All right, and now I'm just going to clean this up really quick. Okay, so this is what you guys should be showing on your pages as well. A nice clean A that kind of drops in equidistant on our page, right? Has equal space in the legs and in the crossbar, right? Now, this is where it gets fun. Now, if you want to change this letter, and this is why I call sans-serif the building blocks, because if you want to change this letter from a sans-serif to a serif, you don't have to draw an entirely new letter. It's this easy. You find equal space on the left and the right of the top, and you just do little cuts, and you try and make them equal. But that quickly, you go from a sans-serif to a serif, and you do the same thing on the feet. You want to make sure that you round those corners, fill in those gaps. Now we have a sans-serif and a serif. I added the feet to the top, or the hat, mind you, on the A, but this is essentially a sans-serif and a serif escalation. It's that simple. Now, if you want to go a step further, you can make this, you could almost make this like an old Western typeface right now. You add a couple of these small flourishes on your center line, right? You can add little ones to the outside here. And then you can turn these up on the bottoms and tops and round the outsides. And this goes from a very basic font that's super building block-esque and has no character necessarily for our purposes into, you know, Cowboy Saloon very quickly, right? You know, I mean, there's so many ways that you can play around with this, but we ultimately just laid out a very basic letter. It was a bunch of singular, equally distanced lines, and we just did 3 different typefaces with that one singular letter, which is really kind of the foundational elements of typography in general. I mean, and you set yourself up for success in those ways. I mean, you can even change this so that, you know, you get the down lines instead, which is a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. I don't know why I chose to go up with those, but you know, you have these now, and I mean, it's that simple. You really have that ease of kind of managing those spaces. All right, so let's lay out another block. We're going to lay out a second block here, and I'm going to show you guys how your X line can dictate how that A can turn into something completely differently really, really quickly with just a differentiation in the X line. So let's lay out another equally distanced piece. I think that one was, how far were you here? 6.5. So we're going to do 6.5. Boom. Let's lay this guy out. Cut back a little bit, like we said, to allow for the 1/4 inch on the pen. Boom. Okay. Now we're going to find our center line, 3 1/4. Never cheat. 3 1/4. That's dead center. We're going to make a, cut it back just a little bit to account for our pen. All right. So our second block here. Now we have this distance in between our 2 letters. All right. Now, at this distance, we're going to come up with a similar letter, but we're going to change that. We want to make this, let's say that you have, this is the kind of like slogan type that you want to use on your concert poster, and we're going to make the header type that you want to use, which is the bold kind of draw you in portion of the typography that you're looking for. Obviously, that's a very loose generalization, and I'm using a concert poster as a basis for that because I love concert posters and I think they're one of the best expressions of typography. But you have so much power with just these 4 grids, right? So drop this guy down just about half of your, drop your X line down just about half where it lives now, right? So cut it to there. All right, so we're gonna do the same A. So you wanna divide your space up equally, go from your top center point of your second square down to the bottom left corner, right? Find that. Now find the other side. Okay. Now, as this develops, being that your X line is lower, you know this is going to be a more sturdy, more thick, more bold, or what they would call slab font, right? So it's going to inherently have like a louder quality. It's basically typing in bold caps, right? Now, fortunately, we have this X line here, but you can put another divider in there and split your space again to give you a guide. Since it's already there, we'll use this one. So you have this area, right? You're going to go from the top of this middle point here down in an equal distance to where your current base is, right? And try and follow and keep this symmetrical. So it's not going to be perfect, like I said, but try and keep those lines so that they're somewhat symmetrical. So in this case, you see that doesn't necessarily line up. We can go again, and boom, we have a pretty symmetrical thickness. Now, the reason we cut the X line lower is because we want this font to sit lower, we want it to be fatter, and we want it to be louder. So take this distance that you have here, which you can measure if you want, feel free. I'm just going to freehand it, but you can cut a line straight across underneath your X line. And now when you fill this in, you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. This is a shorter, fatter A, and it's going to be louder and bolder. And it's going to give off a much different expression than the one next to it. But you have to remember, the foundational components that we used for the first A are all living inside of this A. They're all there. Every single bit of them. The framing lines or the roof lines of the letter, all the way down to the bases, right? Everything is the same. We just thickened up the actual structure of the letter. We dropped down the X line a little bit, and look at the dramatic difference that you get. It's pretty phenomenal. And I mean, this is what I say when I mean cheat codes. Like, this is not anything that, it just took us an exorbitant amount of time. But also, we're going to alter this similarly. You don't have to necessarily. I mean, that's a good A. That's a great A. If you have a similar A to that and you were following along, you have two separate typefaces now, and we're going to go into a third. That equates to 6 different typefaces from 2 A's. So, and also, if you've gotten up to this point, you get me in the class. You're absolutely crushing it. So let's add our flourishes, right? And you're going to see what I'm talking about in terms of your ability to transform the feeling of something. So we'll add our flourishes here, here. We'll do them here. And you can see how the kerning has adapted. You find that equal distance, but with the flourishes, especially, the kerning adapts. So we're going to fill all this in. Okay. Sorry, I'm working fast. These are 2 very similar letters in their basic structure, right? How different do they look now as components on a page? It's pretty fantastic. All right, so now breaking away from this really quick, I just want to jump into something that's gonna hopefully blow your minds a little bit, but ultimately is just another kind of like foundational block for you to build on. So we're going to run a similar line for our baseline. All right. So start a new page if you were working along the same guidelines as me and you just filled one page with those 2 letters. All right. So we have our baseline. Now let's get let's get weird and do an equal kind of even number that's easy to calculate for, let's do 10, okay. So you guys can do, 3, 4, whatever works on your 8.5 by 11. So we're gonna do that. All right. And I'm just doing this for speed because I know we've been here for a little while now. I tend to ramble. All right. So I know that 5 inches from the baseline or the top line is my midpoint. So that's my center. That's my X line. So you have your baseline, your cap line, and your X line in an instant. Always remember to hold your level on both sides. Or at least hold it steady with one hand. All right. Equal distances, right? Okay. So, cap line, baseline, X line, center line, right? Where the X comes when you're doing low case. Now, I'm gonna breeze through this a little bit so that we can end up with a little bit of time for questions in case you guys have them. But italics come into account when you're looking to take a letter like this and turn it into something that has flourishes that's going to be really pretty. And I wanted to spend enough time with you guys to be able to show you that. So we can set up our square again. Set up your square. Okay. Now, this is where things get a little bit tricky, but bear with me. Okay, so you want to find the center of your square. So you can measure from one side to the other here. Let's find my distance. 6 inches. So 3 is my center. All right. Okay. So with italics, you want to start from the far side here, and you want to find that same rhythm to the corner, right? Straight down. Now, instead of drawing your secondary line here, you're just going to keep this where it is. If you want, especially if you're doing hand drawing and you just want to work loosely inside of your cap line and your baseline, you don't even need an X line necessarily. You may want one ultimately just to kind of suss out where all of your caps or your lower cases are going to be. But based on this construction, go ahead and run your secondary line for that letter and here, right? Then you're going to drop your other line in underneath the X line to fill out all 4 of your bars, right? Now, where you can transition and turn this into a cursive letter and a script letter that's beautiful and looks calligraphic, you can take this over the cap line, like I said, rules were made to be broken, and just bring it back in so that it falls where your line has already existed. Now take your outside line that you dropped for the base structure of your A originally, and just bring that around to the X line. And you can cross it over that way to the outside of where your landing point is for the base structure of your A on this side, right? And then you can basically build the same format like this by following the same thickness of your original letter to that leg, okay? And then if you're meeting another letter here, let's say you're meeting an S, right? You can draw out the base point of your base line here with the A, pull it straight into another letter. It can be any letter. it doesn't matter. But now you have the basic structure and calligraphic structure of your cursive A mapped out from the same structure as a sans-serif A. And if you want to, like I was saying before, if you want to, so you guys can see that better, you can play with this however you want. If you want there to be extra flourishes, if you want there to be, you know, if you want to cross over your original arm in the letter, you know, if you want this to lean more, you can always tilt it and drop this back to the center point as well. So this kind of like becomes a smaller window, and then, you know, adjoined with the other letters. But effectively at this point, you have, you know, the ability to, and like I said, the X line, right? But you can drop above this if it's blocking with the other letters, because these are, you know, an S and an O is going to come above. You know, you can astonish minus the H. That's kind of the basics that I wanted to go over today. I know this turned out a little bit dirty. I'm trying to rush so that we can get to questions in case you guys have any. And I'm 100% all ears. So let me know if you guys have any questions, if there's anything. I know we breezed through that really quickly. But yeah, thank you so much for showing up and hanging out. And I sincerely appreciate you guys being here.
Hey, Chad, this is Gabe. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We have a question here from an anonymous attendee. What resources do you recommend the most for learning more hand lettering?
So there's obvious, obvious resources like YouTube. You can go on and do more online tutorials like this. There are some pretty fantastic books and Instagrams to follow if you want inspiration. As far as resources go, Sign Painters, the book and the documentary that's on Netflix are fantastic. Faith Levine and Sam Macon did a fantastic job with those. Type, A Visual History of Typeface is a fantastic book. I highly recommend that for all different kinds of fonts. There's a few Instagram accounts that I would recommend following, at Mr. Seaves, Seaves. That's Gemma O'Brien. She does a ton of amazing typography. Willie Robinson is a local guy. His name's Simon Robinson. It's at WILLIE_Robinson. At Tobias Saul on Instagram. And if you're looking for another shop and an inspiration in terms of typography and lettering in general, Steve Espo down in Gowanus has an amazing walk-in gallery. He sells prints and he's happy to talk to you. I just noticed that Esther wanted me to talk about R's and B's, and I can go over that really quickly. I just want to make sure that we have enough time with everyone because we have another show following this. Gabe, do we have enough time?
Yes, we do. If you want to go over that real quick.
Okay, it'll be 5 minutes. Okay, so for R's and B's, you really want to lay out things similarly to the way that we did for the drop line. So your X line is going to be your split line, okay? And you want the distance between the split line of the letter to have an equal distance on the top and bottom on all three quadrants, okay? So, and I'm just going to freehand this, and hopefully you guys can take notes and better assess this at home once things are done. But so so I'm just going to drop in a kerning line there. So if your letter is this fat, okay, you have to make sure that you're leaving space for an equal distance on both sides. So that looks about right to me in terms of the spacing. from the center point, right? So this is where your X would drop. Now, you want the equal point here. That's the thickness of your drop bar. So that's right about where that's going to sit, okay? You want those on both the top and bottom. Now, here's the fun part. When you're dropping in your curves, and a lot of people get tripped up on this part, okay? This is the easiest way for me to do it. Drop in your curves so that you're making equal shapes from the top to the side of your piece. So if these are equidistant, your letter is going to match up, okay? So you want these two shapes to look very similar. Now, you want to carve in two more here, and you want those to look very similar to the ones on the top and bottom. So you're mirroring all four of these images, right? Then just trace inside your lines. Or if you really want to get technical, you can measure out from this point to match this distance. But ultimately, you follow this around to match up with your original lines. And you end up with a pretty significant looking B straight away, right? I mean, I probably should have just followed my original instincts with that line. But the same thing happens for the R. When you're talking about the R, where we split the distance on the A for the center bar to drop the two lines down, you want to follow that same methodology, right? So split the distance, all right? And then where this line guides you, right? You see where this line drops right here? You want to follow that from here, boom, right down. Now you have your B's and your R's. Does that make sense? Did that make sense, Esther? If you're still tuned in and watching, so you know this is our drop bar for the B. Okay. That's our center point for the B. Okay. The B follows this path around. I'm going to leave that part out, okay? But instead of following the same metric with the bottom or the round bar in the second quadrant, you're just going to drop in an equidistant bar that matches your landing bar here from the center point. So from the center point out, boom, and then you have your R. So it goes from this to that. Awesome. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for tuning in. That was super fun. I really hope you enjoyed yourselves. I'm sorry I didn't drink that more. I would have loved to. I just wanted to make sure we got through all of this. If you have any other questions, feel free to email the website to Littlefield, and Gabe and Caitlin will send them my way, and I'm happy to answer them. I'll also, if you want any more resources, Instagram pages with typography, resources, books, and anything else, movies, let them know, and I will send the links your way. Thank you guys so much. That was fantastic. I really appreciate it.